Okay, so on the topic of marriage and rationals, well, I just want to mention a few things about marriage. Freud pointed out that when he was studying people, um, when people were in therapy, he noticed that the most sexual abuse occurred within marriages. So the most rape actually occurred by far within marriages, and the most sexual trauma. And this is kind of ironic. Marriage is supposed to be kind of the opposite in that regards, but it makes sense to me that that would occur. Another thing is I mentioned that uh, I think 20% of men are raising a child, or 20% of children are being raised by a dad that is not their biological dad, but he thinks he's a biological dad. Studies have indicated this. And if you think about it, really, marriage is a belonging institution based on belonging and being comfortable, but it's really a sexist institution too. It's kind of archaic in that. What does Mrs. mean? Mrs. mean is supposed to be MRS. Mrs. is Misters. It means that the woman is a man's property in the marriage. It is Misters, the man's wife, the Mister's wife. It's possessive. And if you think about it, in America, I don't know, maybe it's over 50% of people are getting divorced. I don't know, and there's a lot of money wasted. Children are hurt in the process. When I'm saying, what's interesting in my case is that my parents are both SJs. They both have the same temperament, and they've been together for maybe 20 years, and they would say that they are happily married. So I'm not saying this in terms of my experience, but I'm looking at the world, and I noticed that that's the case. I think that my parents might get along well because they both have the same temperament. They see the world the same way. But I look at my dad, and he buys SL 500s, big trucks, a lot of guns, a lot of stuff like this that's kind of wasteful. And my mom doesn't mind. And that's leading to what I'm getting about the rationals, the NTs, about not having property as well. I think that a lot of problems in the world occur because of property. There's a large distribution of wealth. People steal, they kill based off of wanting or things that they need to survive. Or, they're jealous. There's a guy, he has a huge house, a lot of stuff, and they think, man, I'm living, I can barely live, and I want what that guy has. This separation causes, it creates, there's a lot of stratification in society, a lot of division. For the rationals, I think that there would be no property, but I think that science is moving in this direction anyways, and I don't really care either way. I honestly don't care. But, there's already machines that are being made that called 3D printers that can make anything that you need. So what's the point of owning stuff if you could just print out your phone? Why would you go out and buy one? You can just print one out. There's the iCloud, so people won't need to have their own type of stuff. Everyone could save their stuff in a cloud. There's really no point in having a lot of the things that people have today, and I think that they're going to become obsolete anyways. So this idea of a society where there is no property is almost inevitable. It's not something that needs to be forced on anybody. It seems like an inevitability. Alright, so one thing I want to mention too is Pascal's Wager. So Pascal describes that you have these four options. One is on God. So one is to. So you have two options. You can believe or not believe in God. And there's two possibilities. Either you're false or you're correct. It's true that God exists. It's either false that God exists or true that God exists. So we can put this in the quadrant thing, and I could show what quadrant each one is, but let's just go through really quick what this says. So if you believe that God exists, if you believe in him, and you are false, this is what Pascal says. He says, you have hard penance in your life, and you have no reward for it in the afterlife. So he says that would suck. But he says, if you believe in God, yes, but it's true that God exists, then your belief was well spent, and you have eternal salvation. And you know what? You can, on your deathbed, say, this is what happens to a lot of people on their deathbed. They say, oh yes, I believe in God. And they think that right after they do that, yes, now they're going to go to heaven just because they believed at the last moment. Then there's the other option of you don't believe in God, no. So once again, we have the quadrant. You reject the wager, you don't believe in God, and you're false. And the existence of God is false. There is no God. So then there's no penance, and you're just dead. It doesn't really matter. And then there's the other option that you do not believe in God, and it is true that God exists. So this Pascal says, this means that you have eternal damnation. So according to Pascal, your best bet is to just believe in him. You might have a hard life if he doesn't exist and you won't have a reward. But if he does exist, wow, eternal salvation. That is what you want. Now, I heard somebody else say this is a fallacy. Pascal's Wager is a fallacy. The reason why he said this is because he said, how do you know that God rewards you based on if you believe in him? How do you know that God isn't just annoyed at people who say, oh yes, I believe in God, and they do it because they want to get eternal salvation? They say, oh yeah, I believe, but really in the back of their mind, it's like it's like Santa Claus. They think, oh, if I'm a good boy, I'm gonna get my good presents. I remember when I was a little kid and I was with my sister, I was singing with my sister. We were singing Christmas songs, and as I was singing in the back of my head, I was thinking, yeah, Santa Claus must be watching me be nice to my sister. So if Santa Claus is watching me, then maybe I'm going to get a lot of good presents this year. Same type of thing I see with religious people. They say they do their little singing, and they think, oh yeah, I'm being so pious, and they think, yes. In the back of their mind, I can just picture it. They're thinking, yes, I'm being so pious, and I can't wait for my eternal salvation. Very selfish. Now, it's interesting because Jesus said in the gospel story, he says, he who's willing to lose his life shall save it. He who's willing to save his life shall lose it. So it seems like somebody who's saying, yes, I accept God, because they want to have this eternal salvation, seems like this a selfish thing. It seems like he's wanting to save his life. And then so we have to go back to the Bible. I can really dissect the Bible for you, hopefully. But this is one thing I want to say. Remember in the Old Testament, just look, there's a part in Numbers just everywhere, but there's a part in Numbers where the Israelites are being disobedient to God. They're just really not obeying anything God's saying. And then God says, gosh, I've done all these miracles. He literally says this. And what does it sound like? It sounds like what the Christians look in the New Testament and they think, oh yeah, God gave up on the Jews. So God says, gosh, I've done all these miracles for them. I've done all these signs, and they still won't obey me. They still don't believe in me. And then, remember I said that disobedience, the opposite of this quadrant, is knowing knowledge, which is death. If you don't believe, you try to seek to know, but this is death. And what does God do to the Israelites? He kills a lot of them. But he actually ends up saving them. So even in this one case where he has this one family killed, who was disobeying Moses and disobeying God, it says later in that, a few chapters later, that he actually did not kill the whole family, and he let the family live. So he kept it, some of the family living. But you see, the opposite of disobedience is death. So God's like, why, they don't. I've shown all these signs, but they don't believe me. They don't obey me. So someone reading this, I'm thinking, stereotypical Christian reading this would say, yes. What the heck is wrong with these Israelites? Can't they, they must be, really horrible. Can't they see that, he saved them from Egypt, according to the story? Can't they see all these things? And how is it that they don't believe in him? Gosh, and I heard a Christian pastor talking about this, and he was saying, the pagans, even the pagans who didn't have real gods, he was saying they believed in their gods, and they obeyed them. But these Israelites who had the one true God, they didn't even obey him. He was saying, how sad. It's funny. But now read the story. Right after God does this, after the disobedience and the killing, what was his name? Damn it, what's his name? Balaam. Balaam was told by this other guy who hated the Israelites. So they were Gentiles. He tells Balaam, the Gentile tells Balaam, go curse the Israelites for us, because they're very powerful and they might kill us. But Balaam is visited by God, and God tells Balaam, do not kill the Israelites. They are a blessed people. And then Balaam ends up going, and then there's 4 times when there's these 4 things. Once again, the quadrant thing is shown. But to make a long story short, Balaam ends up blessing the Israelites. And because God is telling them, these are blessed people. So the question is, why would God, they're being disobedient, they're not believing, but why would God say they're blessed people? Perhaps God is not so into belief as people think. So we see the same thing in the New Testament, where Jesus in the story says that he and God are one, or he and the Father are one. So he's trying to say that he's equivalent. And then he does these parables where he says, like, if you would just so believe me, you would have eternal life, everything would be fine. But you don't believe me, so therefore you taste death. It's all allusions to the Garden of Eden. But when like I said, sometimes it's good to break out of the garden. The garden could be seen as a prison. And this eternal life, this idea, if you stay, you could have eternal life. It's tempting to stay content, to stay believing, to stay ignorant. But there's also that desire to break out of that, to bite the apple. Now, so what I was gonna get at was, so there's one parable, another parable, where Jesus in the story tells a parable, and he says, it's once again, it takes the form of the quadrant. So he says there's one person who, there's one man, there's these people, and they're taking care of a vineyard, and then the person who owns a vineyard sends somebody to collect money or something, but then they kill him. And then he sends the second person, and then they kill him. He sends a third person, and they kill him. And the way that the people are described, it takes the form of the pattern, the quadrant. Then the fourth one, the man sends his son, and he says, for certain they will not kill my son. But then they kill the son. And then Jesus says, what are they gonna, what is this man gonna do who sent these people? He's going to have them, taken out of the field, out of the vineyard. It's kind of like a parable of the Garden of Eden. He says he's going to, they disobeyed him. He's going to have them take him out of the field, and he's going to give the land to a different people. And then, so he's telling this to a Jewish person. I think it was a Jewish woman. And then the Jewish person says, so so the Jewish person thought that he was referring to the Jews as and this is what Christians say. They say that what the guy was saying was that the Jewish people were the tenants of the vineyard, and God. They're saying that those first three people were prophets, and the fourth one was a son of God, and they killed him. So once again, the Jews are depicted as the fourth quadrant. They're not just believing, they're not behaving, they're not accepting. So Jesus says that vineyard is going to be taken from them, the Jews, and it's going to be given to another people. And then the woman says, God forbid, no. But then Jesus says, well, then what does it mean and he says, he quotes the Old Testament. He's always quoting the Old Testament and always saying things from the Old Testament. But he says that the stone that the builders rejected will become the capstone. The way that I look at this, though, is you have to think about this. Once again, it's the same type of thing. The Jews are depicted as the not belonging, not believing, behaving. They don't follow the orders of the tenant. They end up killing. And then they have to be kicked out of the garden now, or kicked out of the vineyard. Is it a bad thing to be kicked out of the vineyard? But Jesus says that the people the stone that the builders rejected shall become the capstone. And then the woman says, God forbid, don't, no. Well, the woman was saying, no, God forbid, when you said that the Jews would be rejected. So, but what just happened? Jesus just rejected the Jews. But right afterwards, he says that the stone the builders rejected shall become the capstone. So once again, the people that were rejected, it's not necessarily a bad thing to be rejected. It becomes the capstone. So did Jesus really reject the Jews? Back in the Old Testament, the Jews wouldn't believe. They got in trouble and stuff, but God never rejected them. And like I pointed out, there's no indication in what I was saying that Jesus all of a sudden, really loved the Gentiles and didn't like the Jews. The Gentiles, once again, are depicted as SJ's second quadrant. The Jews are depicted as NT's fourth quadrant. In fact, it seems that when he says that salvation comes from the Jews, when he says only preach to the children of Israel, and in the very end when he says make disciples of all nations, remember it wasn't clear whether he was saying of Jews of all nations or if he was talking about Gentiles still. So the question is, did it seems like it's questionable. It's not clear, as a lot of Christians think, that Jesus rejected the Jews in these stories. So just to make that clear. So the fallacy is, does God really look highly upon believers? Or through these parables, is he trying to say something different? The fallacy is people think if I just believe, even if it's on my deathbed, if I just say I believe, in my heart, if I believe, then I'm going to be saved. I'm going to have eternal life. But this could be a fallacy. Because if you want to assume that God exists, how would you know that God really likes, quote unquote, believers? Just food for thought. All right, and then what else I want to talk about? I think that's good for now. Hopefully continue more later.